Now let's look at another example of the test of independence of two variables. And this test of independence is also called contingency table or cross tabulation. And this time we're going to look at how to prepare the observed frequency table. In the previous example, from the text, the table itself was given. The observed frequencies were already summarized and they were given to us. But what if we have to prepare that summary table ourselves? Okay, that's what we're going to do here. So from Bureau of Labor Statistics, we have the unemployment rate for 372 major metropolitan areas by region. So that's given here. So here the region and the unemployment rate. So this is metropolitan areas in the south, metropolitan areas in the west, and so on. And what are the corresponding unemployment rates? Okay, now we want to test whether the unemployment rates are dependent upon the region. In other words, is there a correlation between the region and the unemployment rate, or the unemployment rate is independent of which part of the country we are talking about? So that's what we want to test. So we want to set up the hypothesis and we use an alpha value of 5%. So let's set that up first. Okay, now we need to set up the observed frequencies. Once we have the observed frequencies, then the rest of it is exactly like before. So we compute the expected frequency and compute the chi-squared values and so on. Now, so here is the data, and we want to set up the observed frequencies from this. And how can we do that? There are several ways of doing this, but I think the easiest way is to use what is called pivot table. And sometimes a pivot table needs to be set up separately in a different region, and you do all the formatting and so on, grouping, and then once you have the finished pivot table, then we can move it to where we want to put. So we want to put it here, but first let's set it up somewhere over in this side. Okay, so how do we set up the pivot table? So we start with highlighting the entire data. So here we start from the label for the column. Okay, now we want to highlight the entire column of the region and the unemployment rate. And the easiest way to do that is press the shift key and keep it depressed. Don't let it go. Then press the end key and let it go, and press the down arrow key and let it go. And that will expand the selection for that entire row. So end, down arrow. So that takes us all the way down. And then you don't let the shift key go. Keep it depressed and then press the right arrow one time, so it will cover column K as well. Now you can let it go. Now the entire data set is now highlighted. Okay, so now you go and insert pivot table. So the highlighted range is already selected. Now you want to put the pivot table. Okay, let's put the pivot table in this sheet itself. So let's put it right here somewhere. Okay, we'll do all the formatting and then we will move it to where we want to put it. Okay, so click OK. Now what this does is it simply sets up a template, and then it gives you an area where you can make all the selections. And these are the two variables, region and unemployment rate. So let's put the region as rows. So it puts the regions here. And let's put the unemployment rate as the columns. Okay. So now we have the unemployment rates, but of course there is one column for each unemployment rate. We'll get to that in just a second. Now we want to populate this template with the number of frequencies. So you can select either one of these and put those in the values. Okay. If you select a non-numeric variable as the summarizing variable, count will be used for summary, and you will have the number of times the observations occur in each cell. But instead, instead of that, suppose if you used unemployment rate. Unemployment rate is a numeric variable. So numeric variable, when you use that as a summarizing variable, Excel will default to sum. So you will end up summing all those unemployment rates for each of them instead of simply counting how many fall in each cell. So in that case, you have to go in here and go to value field settings, okay, and change the summary from sum to count. Okay, so you have to be very careful. You have to check this and make sure that count is what is used for summarization. Okay. So now we have the basic table, except that the unemployment rates are all over the place. So we want to group these. So let's group them. Okay, you have to use some judgment here. So click on any one of these columns and then you right click and you see there is an option for grouping. So you click group. Now you can select where to start. Okay, I'm going to use 5, and where to end, and by how much each column should be how many in the range. So I'm going to go from 5 to 9 in increments of 2. Okay. So anything less than 5, 5 to 7, 7 to 9, and greater than 9. So and let's change these column labels to unemployment rate. Okay. And row label to region. Okay. Now we can sort this. Okay, suppose we go and select, right click and select sort. So you can sort it by alphabetical order, ascending or descending. But suppose we want to just simply use our judgment in terms of south and northeast and so on, you can simply click and move the rows up and down. So suppose we want northeast first, so move northeast first, make a plus like that, northeast, midwest, and then say south after that, and then northwest and west. Okay, you can, and then the column widths, suppose we want the column widths to be all the same. Okay, so now we are done with all the formatting and everything. So now we can move. So highlight what we want to move. Okay, and you can move it with the mouse, or you can do Control X and Control V to insert the pivot table here. Let's see, we want to put it at A14. Okay, and let's say that we want the labels to be right adjusted, so they will look good. So this is our observed frequency. So one more thing, let's call this observed frequencies. Observed frequency F sub ij. Okay, now let's right adjust that. So now we need to set up the expected frequencies. We already have the row totals and the column totals. So expected frequencies, or so let's get the column titles, which is B15. Okay, copy that. Okay, and the regions are from A16. Copy that and put the border back. Now we'll set up the expected frequencies. So the expected frequencies, okay, I would suggest that you type the cell references, because in a pivot table, if you click like that, it puts the get pivot data formula that makes it kind of complicated. So instead, what we will do is we'll simply type the cell references. So that will be F16. So F16, remember, it should be absolute referenced for F and not for 16. And then B21, this should be absolute referenced for 21 divided by F21, and that should have absolute reference for both. Okay. Now copy across, copy down. Okay. Now sum for the row. Okay, it's the same as here. This summing here is just for verification to make sure that we have computed the expected frequencies correctly. Okay. Now notice that there are a couple of them with less than 5. So that there is a 3.75 and 4.75 that are less than 5, but most of them are greater than 5, and these are also not very much off. It's slightly less than 5, so this is okay. This is not a big problem. Next, we compute the chi-squared computation. Once again, let's set the row titles and the column titles from here. Okay, and then B16. So B16, type that in. B16 is the observed frequency minus B25 squared divided by B25. So that's our chi-squared computation. Copy. Copy. Now let's put the border back, and the calculated value for chi-squared is the sum of all of that. Okay, the number of rows is count A. Okay, that's number of rows, so it'll go like that. And count A number of columns. Okay, degrees of freedom is n minus 1 times m minus 1. And now we are ready to do the test. So chi-squared dot inv dot rt with alpha of 5% and degrees of freedom from here. Now if chi-squared calculated value is greater than the table value, we reject. In this case it is greater, and therefore we reject the null hypothesis. Okay. Now if you want to use p-value approach, then we do chi-squared dot dist dot rt and use the chi-squared calculated value and degrees of freedom. That will give us the p-value, and that p-value is, well, pretty close to 0. Well, I should put that here. So the conclusion is we reject the null hypothesis. So what we are saying here is that there is a dependency between the region and the unemployment rate. So they are not independent. And the probability that our conclusion is wrong is nearly 0. We are almost certain that there is a relationship between the region of the country and the unemployment rate. Okay, and we state that here in this fashion.